Welcome to another Friday night. We've been going through a series where we're taking a deeper look at the 60 characteristics of complex trauma. And today we come to one that we call people from complex trauma create what they hate, or they create what they're trying to avoid, or they create the opposite of what they want to happen. And it happens all the time, and a common question is, why do I do that? So before I answer that, let me just kind of set the stage by painting this backdrop. People from complex trauma grow up in environments where there's lots of danger, or where their needs aren't met, or where there's many violations of love. So there's lying, there's abuse, there isn't justice. All of those things are happening. And they hate that aspect of their childhood. And they never want to see that happen in their life again. They want their needs met, etc. And so they start out with a determination, I'm never going to be abandoned again. I'm never going to be disrespected again. I'm never going to be lied to again. And then they move into adult life and they end up being abandoned again and disrespected again. And it happens over and over, so they create, without realizing it, the very environment that ends up creating what they've been trying to avoid, or the thing that they hate. So let me give you a couple examples just to help you understand it. So somebody that's been abandoned goes, that is the worst emotional experience to go through, being abandoned. Makes you feel like you don't matter at all. I never want that to happen again. So they get in a relationship, determined that they'll never be abandoned, but what they then do is they're super needy, or they test the person all the time, or they try to control the person all the time. And after a while, the other person goes, I'm done with this, and they walk out of the relationship, and the person feels abandoned again. Or I've had so many people say to me, I grew up and I said, I'm never going to be like my dad. My dad was an addict. My dad had anger issues. My dad was in jail periodically. And they're determined not to become their dad. And when they hit adult life, they're an addict, they're in jail, and they got anger issues. Or, I don't want a husband like my last husband. So I'm going to find a new husband who's not going to be like my last husband. And they date and they end up married to somebody that they think is totally opposite of their last husband, and then they find out he's very much like their last husband. Or, I don't want my kids to make the same bad decisions that I made. And so they start out in parenting to try to make sure their kids don't repeat their mistakes. And they find out 15, 20 years later that their kids have made the same decisions that they made when they were a teenager. They created what they were trying to avoid, what they hate. They created the opposite of what they wanted. So why is that? Well, let me give you some reasons, because there's many different factors that can come to play on why we create what we hate. So the first one is a hyper need. So when a need is not met in a child, they can go in two different directions, extremes. They can try to shut that need off, and we'll get back to that in a minute. Or it can create a hyper need. I need it, I want it, I want it, I want it. And so let me give you a couple examples. Let's say a child was not validated, and we all have a need to be validated. And so when they come to their teen years and adult life, they have this hyper need of wanting to be validated. So they chase people around. Was I good enough? Was I good enough? They're always looking for applause, for pats on the back. And what happens with that hyper need? People get tired of having that person always looking for validation, and they stop giving them validation. So the child has a hyper need for validation because they never got it as a child, but what they end up is creating is nobody wants to give them validation, exactly what happened when they were a child. Or let's say a person who was never heard. Whenever they tried to explain or give their opinion, nobody listened to them. So now they're going, I need to be listened to. So whenever they're in a conversation, they overtalk, they over-explain, they talk too much, they butt in to get heard, and after a while people go, enough with this person, I'm not even listening to them. So now they're not heard again. They created what they are trying to avoid. Or a person who was never understood. Nobody took the time to understand where they're coming from. So that hurts. And now today they go, I need to be understood. And so now they over-explain everything. Whenever they think somebody doesn't understand them, they chase them around saying, let me explain, let me explain, let me explain. And pretty soon people are tired of that. And so now they end up not being understood again because nobody wants to listen to their never-ending explanations. Or let's say a child was made to feel stupid all the time. So now they think the thing that I need to do in order to not be perceived as stupid is to give very academic answers, to share my opinion all the time. But after a while, people go, I'm tired of listening to this person, and they get treated as if they're stupid again. So that can happen over and over. So that hyper need situation can set a person up to not get that need met. Exactly what happened when they were a child. But then there's another part to this need thing. So sometimes when you shut that need off, you don't even think it's a need, and you just think you have other needs, but you don't understand that deep, deep need trumps all of the lesser needs in your life. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you were rejected and abandoned. That hurts like crazy. But you just shut that off, and you basically went to, I don't need people. I don't care about people. I'm going to isolate. I'm never going to let people see the real me. I am going to wear masks. I am going to put up walls so that nobody can get close enough to hurt me again. And so you think my need is to be self-sufficient. My need is to be liked by people and to wear masks and to have walls and not be authentic. All of those things, those are my needs, but you don't understand that your deep, deep need is to connect, to be authentic. And so you live in isolation, but now you feel a deep loneliness, a deep longing to be loved. Those two deep needs of connection and love are not being met by your solution to never being rejected or abandoned again. And that desire to be loved will cause you to seek out relationships. It will cause you to miss red flags in relationships and get into relationships with unsafe people, and before you know it, you're getting hurt and abandoned and rejected again. So not understanding the deep, deep needs of the human being, needs that many have turned off because of early wounds, those still will ultimately trump everything else. Another one that I see all the time is a person who grows up with a family where they're constantly shamed, made to feel like they don't matter, like they're stupid, etc. And so they go, I don't need that validation. I don't need all these different needs met. But what they don't realize is they have this deep, deep longing to be validated by their family. Deep, deep longing to be accepted and to belong by their family. And so they go into recovery and they think all my needs is I need to make a few friends, I need to do my recovery work, but they don't understand how deep the longing is for their family to validate them and accept them, and they keep running back to their family for validation, and they keep getting shamed. The very thing they don't want, they ended up creating because they didn't understand that deep need. Now, there's another need kind of variable here that is important to understand. In the case of sexual abuse for a young child, it awakens a drive before kind of the planned time, the natural time when it would be awakened. So the sex drive normally awakens 11, 12 years old. But let's say a child's molested at 5 or 6. What can happen when you have that drive awaken before the planned time is, again, a child can go in two different directions. They just hate sex, turn it off, it's a dirty, bad thing. Or they can have a hypersex drive, and they can become promiscuous. But what happened to that little child was, I never want to be molested again. I never want to be sexually abused again. I hate it. But then because they end up with this hyper-sex drive and they're promiscuous all the time, guess what happens? They end up in situations where they get sexually abused again. They created what they were trying to avoid without even realizing it. Now, there's another reason why people create what they hate. And that is because they turned off their intuition, their radar system, their gut. So the question I get asked all the time is, people from trauma end up with more trauma in their adult life than people from healthy homes who don't have childhood trauma. Why is it that people from trauma end up with more trauma? And I think often it's around this radar system. So consider this scenario. A child is going to be going to their uncles or to their babysitters, and their gut says that person is not safe. They tell their parents, I don't feel comfortable with that babysitter, I don't feel comfortable with my uncle. They're listening to their gut, but their parent says, oh, they're safe, there's nothing wrong with them, go ahead. And they go and they get molested. What they then do is tell their parents, and their parents says, you're making it up. No, that really didn't happen. Oh, it's your fault, whatever. And they get sent to that uncle or that babysitter again. So what the child realizes is my radar system, which is designed to warn me to get away from that person, I am not able to get away from that person because I'm a child and I have parents who are forcing me to go to that person. So why do I want a radar system when I can't listen to it? It's just annoying to have sirens going off when I can't listen to them. So they shut down their alarm system, their gut, their intuition, because there's no point in having it, and it's annoying. So now they get to adult life, and they're going out on a date, and their alarm system says, red flags, danger, danger, but they've turned it off. And they just walk into danger now and get traumatized again. The third reason why people create what they hate or end up in situations that they've been trying to avoid is because of their default setting that they developed as a child, what was their normal as a child. So for example, a child grows up with a narcissist dad or a narcissist mom. And what happens with that is they hate that narcissist dad, they hate that narcissist mom, but that's their normal. That's all they know. That's how they've learned to relate to people. And that's their life. And so without realizing it, they go into adult life hating narcissists, but feeling the most comfortable with narcissists. Being drawn to narcissists because it feels normal. And ending up back in the exact situation they hated when they were a child. Or many grew up in homes where they were disrespected, made fun of, put down. They hated that, but it was their normal. And so now they're drawn into situations in other relationships with people who realize I can put this person down and get away with it, and the person just takes it because that's their normal. It feels normal. So they end up in situations much like their childhood just because that's where their comfort zone is. So if you consider the fact that a child growing up in complex trauma could be growing up with hundreds of unhealthy family dynamics, relationship dynamics, coping dynamics, but they don't know they're unhealthy because it's their normal. And so now they go into adult life and they gravitate to what feels normal. There's a fourth one that I think is so important to understand, and it's to understand the power of a parent's influence. We often think that we are deeply influenced by what our parents say to us and do to us, or do, their actions and their words, and those are the two things only that influence us. But do you realize that you are also influenced by who your parent is, by their beliefs, by their values, by their attitudes, by their fears, by their emotional makeup, by their coping, by their thinking? All of those things you're picking up, you're affected by, you're influenced by without even realizing it. And so your parents are like this greenhouse, that incubator that puts all of this influence on you, and it shapes you and forms you without you even realizing it. And so those things you just pick up. They become your normal. They become your autopilot. You learn to cope with like your parents did without even realizing it. You respond to stress like your parents did without even realizing it. You develop attitudes that your parents have without even realizing it. The power of a parent's influence, I can hate what they did and hate what they said, but then I end up like them because I picked up all of their ways of thinking and coping, their values and beliefs. That is a very hard thing to accept, but it shows the power of parents' influence. Now, let me take that further. We often, when we think of procreation, think of creating a physical baby. We're going to create physical life. So we think of procreation in terms of physical life only. But think of it also that in procreation, I'm not just creating a physical life, I'm creating a soul. I'm creating a human being, a soul. Think about that. It's really easy to create a physical life, but do you realize it's easy to create an unhealthy soul, but very hard to create a healthy soul? Take it further. I can create a physical life just by one act, but to create a healthy physical soul takes years of consistent being healthy, influencing them, modeling for them, responding to them in healthy ways. It takes years to create a healthy soul, one act to create a physical life, and easy to create an unhealthy soul. Take it further. To create a physical life requires only an action. To create a healthy soul requires words, actions, and who I am. My attitudes, my responses. If I am healthy, I can create a healthy soul. If I am not healthy, I cannot create a healthy soul. I will create an unhealthy soul. So procreation is more than just giving physical life, passing on my genes. It's creating a soul who's like my soul. And so if I am going to pass on healthy, I have to be healthy. So here's one of the hard things I think for people to face when we look at create what we hate. We often think of create what we hate only in terms of doing it in my own life. But what I want you to see is we create what we hate, not just in our own life, but also in our children. Because if I don't get healthy myself, I will just pass on unhealthiness, and they will be like me and like their grandparents who I hated and didn't want to be like. That is a hard reality, but that is what happens. Creating what we hate becomes a generational thing if we don't stop the cycle by becoming healthy ourselves. Let me give you a fifth reason why we create what we hate, and it's called cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort we feel when our mind entertains two contradictory concepts at the same time. So let me give you kind of an example of this. There's what I refer to as healthy cognitive dissonance. It's designed as a good thing. So you have a healthy belief that lying is wrong, that stealing is wrong, that is drilled into you, that trains your conscience. Now you consider stealing from someone and lying to someone, and all of a sudden you have two contradictory things happening inside of you, and it creates this discomfort. I don't like what I'm feeling right now. There's this dissonance inside of me. Now that was designed to be a good thing, because what it is saying is, if I program my conscience with healthy, whenever I try to become unhealthy, there will be dissonance which will motivate me to not do the unhealthy. To say, I don't like how this makes me feel, so I'm not going to do it. That's the healthy design. But now enter complex trauma. So, two different scenarios. What happens in complex trauma is a child has to do unhealthy tools in order to survive. So they can be told lying is bad, but in order to not get unjustly punished, they got to lie about a lot of things to survive. So their conscience has been trained to not lie, but they have to lie to survive, so they just harden their conscience. They shut it up. They don't want it chirping at them. So that can happen. Secondly, you can get a conscience that's mistrained by wrong beliefs. Your family can say to you, you should never say no. You need to please people all the time. Love is never saying no to anybody. And they drill that into you, and when you try to say no, at times you get punished for that. And so it's trained into you that never say no. But then you come into recovery, and you realize that love says no. Love sets boundaries. There are times when it is right to say no. But what does that feel like now inside your brain? It is healthy as contradicting what you were raised with. You didn't know it was unhealthy. But now when you want to get healthy, now you got dissonance, cognitive dissonance inside you. It doesn't feel good to now start saying no. You now feel guilty. You now feel all kinds of unrest inside of you. And so complex trauma creates a belief system of lies, so that now when you want to choose the truth, it creates cognitive dissonance. Complex trauma mistrains your conscience, so now when you want to act in healthy ways, you feel cognitive dissonance. So you've got to fight against that. So let me give you another example. Let's say your experience and what your family taught you is you can't trust anybody. People can't be trusted. And that was drilled into you, and your experience seemed to confirm it. Now you come into recovery and you go, I like this person. I see that I need people in my life. I need to trust. Now when you go, I think I'm going to trust this person, you feel dissonance. It doesn't feel right. It makes you feel really uncomfortable. And so do you know what a lot of people do? They sabotage healthy relationships just to get out of that dissonance that they're feeling. So here's what I want you to understand. In order for you to grow in recovery and get healthy, you're going to fight cognitive dissonance. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. Let me give you a sixth thing that can result in us creating what we hate. And that is, we wrongly diagnose why we got hurt in the first place, and then we come up with the wrong solution so that we never get hurt again. So an example, you are disrespected as a child, and your diagnosis is because it must have happened because I'm different, I'm too emotional, I'm too sensitive. So the solution is to stuff all of that down and wear masks all the time and become a people pleaser. That way I'll never get disrespected again. So to a child, that seems logical. It seems like the right diagnosis and it seems like the right solution. But it isn't. Because if you become a people pleaser and you never say no to anybody and they can use you and walk all over you, they may like you at first, but they're going to start to disrespect you because you don't have a backbone. So the very thing you were trying to prevent, being disrespected, you ended up creating by a wrong diagnosis and a wrong solution. Another way that this works out is what I call a pendulum swing. So people say, I hate my dad. He had all kinds of anger issues. He was a narcissist. I am not going to end up with a husband like my dad. So they go out and they look for guys that seem totally opposite of their dad. Different personality. Maybe their dad was an extrovert, they look for an introvert. Maybe their dad was loud and emotional, they look for somebody quiet. And they think, I found the opposite. But what they've missed is the real reason for their dad's issues was not just his personality, it was his shame. It was his unhealed wounds. It was a whole bunch of deep, deep things, but they didn't know that. And so they just look for an opposite personality. Somebody who's not an extrovert, somebody who's quiet. But they end up with somebody with shame because they're drawn to shame. That's their normal. And they end up with somebody with a lot of shame. Even though he's an introvert, he's still got anger issues. So the pendulum swing, you think you're getting the opposite. You think you're guaranteeing you're not even get close to being like your dad. You misdiagnosed it, though. Another example, conflict. So let's say you grew up with tons of conflict. Conflict was never resolved. Conflict always resulted in people getting hurt. And you said, I hate conflict. I never want conflict in my relationships today. So I will become a people pleaser. I will never rock the boat. I will always be the one that makes sacrifices and give in. I will sweep things under the carpet and avoid talking about problem-type situations. And you think that will guarantee that I'll never have conflict. But it's a misdiagnosis. The way to avoid conflict is to resolve it when it happens and learn from it. What you're doing by people-pleasing, never rocking the boat, you're just piling up unresolved issues. And they keep piling up until there's ongoing tension, ongoing irritability, and then there's an explosion. So the very thing you're trying to avoid because you misdiagnosed and you came up with the wrong solution, you ended up creating. Let me give you one more example in this area. So let's say a girl was sexually abused. In her mind, she doesn't understand how it's affected her. She doesn't understand all of the underlying dynamics, okay? So she just goes through life never wanting to be sexually abused again. But what are her deep needs that she's not aware of? She has a deep need for love, a deep need for validation, a deep need to feel value. But she didn't get that from her parents, and she didn't realize how that affected her. But she was a very pretty girl. And she found out she got lots of validation for her body, for her looks. And she liked that. It made her feel good. It seemed to be meeting these needs. So now when she starts meeting guys They're giving her tons of validation, and she's chasing that. And she's going after guy, looking for that validation. And what ends up? She gets raped. She gets abused again because she misdiagnosed what was really causing all of her problems. Another one that can contribute to this creating what we hate is what we call a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we have an experience, we create beliefs, and then we predict what we think will happen based on our experience and our beliefs. We create expectations. So in a healthy family, you end up with a whole bunch of things that if you're authentic, you connect. That becomes your belief system, and you expect if you're authentic, you will connect in the future. What you need to understand is complex trauma, your experiences, if you're authentic, you get rejected. It creates a set of beliefs that you think are true, but they are lies. And so what you then do is say, okay, the way to get accepted is to never be authentic. So you go into all your relationships expecting that if I'm ever authentic, I will get rejected. And guess what happens? You go into relationships, you wear masks, you wear walls, you might let a little bit of yourself out, and people start rejecting you because you're fake. And then you go, see, I tried and I got rejected. You created what you were trying to avoid. Let me give you another example. A young girl, and this is based on a true story. Whenever she gave her opinion, whenever she asked a question, whenever she expressed a need to her parents, she was punished. She was made to feel selfish. She was made to feel bad. So giving her opinion, expressing a need, sharing, always resulted in something bad. So she decided to shut down, to not have any needs, to never express a need. That she was just this invisible child. She went to school, and she had a new school teacher. And this school teacher had a real desire to form an emotional connection with each child. She was warm, she was accepting, she was safe. She reached out to each child to understand them, to find out what interested them, to connect with them. But this young girl, no way. If I express myself, if I open up, if I share, I will get rejected. So she would not give in to this teacher. For months, the teacher tried to connect with this child. She was able to connect with all the other children in the class, but this one child held out, would not open up, would not warm up. So after several months, the teacher finally gave up and just said, okay, this child will not let me in. I will not try to push any further. And guess how that child interpreted that? See? Everybody rejects you. That's just the way life is. That just confirms my belief that everybody will ultimately reject you. And so she became even more determined to never open up again. Many of you grew up with people can't be trusted, people will let you down. And so your belief is when you get in a relationship, they're going to eventually let me down. But you go into a relationship and you're super needy. And you start phoning the person in the middle of the night. You start asking if they can meet for coffee. And you just push boundaries and you demand and you demand and you demand. And you basically want the person to respond to you perfectly every time and be available 24/7. And finally the person says, I can't do this, and sets some boundaries. And then you go, see, people let me down. I shouldn't have trusted this person. You created a self-fulfilling prophecy. You were controlled by a lie. And somebody has said this, a lie can only control a person if they continue to believe it. Somebody else has said, if you expect the battle to be insurmountable, which would be a lie, you have met the enemy, which is you, for believing that lie. Okay, how do we heal this? How do we change? How do we stop creating what we're trying to avoid? Let me just give you a few practical things. So number one, in light of what we said earlier, you have to fight cognitive dissonance. You have to realize that your conscience has been programmed with lies and unhealthy things that you were told were healthy. So now for you to try and get healthy is going to create dissonance. It's going to create uncomfortable feelings. And those can make you feel guilty. They can make you second guess yourself. They can make you feel confused. Am I doing the right thing? Because it feels wrong. But that's what you have to go through in recovery until you retrain your conscience. You have to fight through cognitive dissonance. Now be aware that if you have a family still in your life and you start to get healthy, guess what? They are going to go back to the unhealthy and say, you're wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. And they're going to create even greater cognitive dissonance. So you're not just fighting your own internal conscience that's been mistrained. You're fighting external voices that are telling you lies. So be aware of that. Secondly, be aware of the lies you believe. Be aware of the patterns that you have. And then begin to work on all of the shame, because the shame is often underneath so many of our behaviors. And it's often the thing that we don't see when we try to diagnose why we do what we do. So begin to understand the depth of your shame, how it has affected you, so that you can heal those things. And then learn about all the other deeper issues: shame, abandonment, deep losses. Understand how they've affected you, neglect, abuse, so that you can find healthy solutions and you can make a healthy diagnosis. That is so important. And again, I would encourage you, if you want more understanding, to take our LIFT course or our REACT program that will help you understand these things at a deeper level. And finally, you need safe people. The very reason you didn't want that part of your life anymore, the reason you hate it, is because unsafe people did stuff to you. They abandoned you. They rejected you. They disrespected you. All of those things that you're trying to avoid were created by unsafe people. If you go back to unsafe people today, you're going to end up getting hurt again. You need to go to safe people. You need to begin to have people where you can reprogram your belief system, because now you're going to get a different result. Well, that's the end of part one. I just hope that helps you in your journey of wanting to begin to get healthy and not keep repeating stuff you're trying to avoid. We're going to take a short break and then we'll come back for the